All right. The Hoover Board of Education meeting is called to order. If you choose, please join me in a moment of silent prayer. Thank you.
Please stand for the pledge. Salute, pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You have before you the agenda for today's board meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is adopted. Okay, tonight Dr. Murphy will be presenting charter school authorization.
Yes.
Dr. Murphy.
Board members, I want to just make just a couple of comments and then wanted to ask if you would come and sit in front of where you currently are so that you can see our screen. I've asked Dr. Ron Dotson to work with us in preparing a PowerPoint presentation just to sort of capture some of the essential pieces of the charter school legislation, and certainly want to leave most of our time to trying to answer questions and ask the critical questions and make sure that we're comfortable as we can be as we have this conversation. So if we could, let's just take our chairs out front. And Dr. Dotson, I want to thank Dr. Dotson and Melody Green and others who've worked with us on this PowerPoint presentation.
Just a move.
Gentlemen, y'all may be ready. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is that William Shakespeare or William Byron?
Let's take a combination of the two. Well, all right, to be an authorizer or not to be an authorizer, that is the question of the evening. We've attempted to compile the best information we could find. There are still a lot of unanswered questions in this issue. Our policy guiding bodies, AASSB and other organizations like that, are doing their best to get up to speed on everything, to provide credible information. So this is the best we can gather at the time, but hopefully this is helpful to you in your deliberations. The very first thing to ask is, what is a public charter school? If we're talking about charter schools, what are we talking about? And specifically, we need to look at the definition that is provided in the recently passed legislation, the Alabama School Choice and Accountability Act. So within that, what is a charter school in Alabama? This legislation creates two types of public charter schools. And the word public charter school is important in this context. Of course, the implication being that it is still a public school, it still runs on public funds, et cetera, et cetera. But there's essentially two types: a conversion public charter school, which is where you take an existing public school, a school that currently exists today, before charters, and is converted into a charter. And that can be done at the local level by a local board authorizer. There's no limit on the conversion charter schools that can happen. A startup public charter school is a new school, a school that didn't exist before, was not previously existing as a private school or any entity like that. There is a state limit on that of 10 per year for at least the first 5 years of the law, and then that will be reviewed.
Ron,
Yes?
if you're going to have a conversion charter school, somebody, can I, as a John Q. citizen, walk up to Kathy Murphy and say, we want to start a charter school over there where South Shades Crest is? We want to make that a charter school. Is that the way it works?
For a conversion charter, first of all, the local board of that district would have to be an authorizer.
Right.
And then you'd have a process in place. If that person would qualify as an applicant under that process, they could ask that. But for a school that currently exists as one of your schools, the local board would have to make that decision.
Right.
The commission
Which
cannot
will
impose
anyway as
that.
an authorizer,
Correct.
no matter what you do.
Right. Certain characteristics that you would expect a charter school to have under this legislation. First of all, it would be governed, both a conversion and a startup would be governed by an independent board. That is a 501c3 tax exempt organization. It would be a school to which parents choose to send their student. No student would be compelled to attend a charter school, whether it's a conversion school or a startup school. It would be established and operated under the terms of its charter contract. We'll talk a little bit more about those contracts later. And then it has autonomy over key decisions, including but not limited to decisions concerning finance, personnel, scheduling, curriculum, instruction, and procurement. We'll talk a little bit more about the flexibility that's associated around number 4 in a moment. It admits students on the basis of random selection if student applications exceed the building capacity. Students within the existing zone for the school would have first preference, then students in the surrounding district. And then afterwards, if there's still seats available in the school, the charter school would open that up to anyone in the state of Alabama who wanted to attend. They may focus on a specific theme, but that theme cannot be used as admissions criteria. You could, for example, open a charter school that's a middle school for boys, but you could not exclude girls from applying to that school on the basis of that identification. Operates in pursuit of educational objectives as defined in its charter contract, and operates under the oversight of its authorizer. And that oversight is something that we've studied a lot over the last few days. Some specific exclusions in the law. A school with exclusive admissions requirements would be excluded. You can't have any requirements that would exclude a student from enrolling of any kind. A school with tuition requirements. A school with a parochial or religious theme, or an existing private school would not be eligible under this act to become a charter school.
Ron,
Yes, sir.
on a 501c3, is that potentially an end around for tuition requirements?
An end around.
Yes, in other words, let's just say I want my son to play football, but I couldn't afford the $600 spirit pack, but somebody else contributes on my behalf, you know. So in other words, you don't really charge tuition officially, but you will accept donations into the non-profit foundation.
The governing boards can raise funds, yes, but they can't have a tuition requirement.
Right.
So even if they stated a tuition, then that would
Oh, yeah,
exclude
yeah, I
them.
got that.
But yes, they can raise funds. The charter contract itself is a fixed-term, renewable contract between the public charter school and the authorizer that outlines the roles, powers, responsibilities, quantitative and qualitative performance expectations for each party to the contract. This is huge because this governs everything that happens henceforth once you've approved an application for a charter school. So this will be big.
Question on that.
Yes, sir.
I mean, we don't know whether or not, we don't know the extent of the liability we would have as a charter school authorizer in entering into a contract with someone who wants to have a charter school.
At this point, no. There are specific exclusions and immunities mentioned in the law, but I'll talk about a couple of those that give me heartburn and I think a lot of lawyers as well.
That's opportunity.
Opportunities on that side of the fence, perhaps. The flexibility that charters would enjoy under this law is pretty significant. First of all, teacher certification. Teachers are not required to be certified in a charter school. However, because there will still be federal funds tied to certain programs, if students who qualify for certain services that are supported through federal funds, those federal funded units would continue to have to meet the highly qualified requirement under federal law. So there could still be some teachers that would have to have those requirements, whereas other teachers in the school might not. But if they serve students who are federally funded, the highly qualified would still be there. That one's murky, and there's going to have to be some more specific guidelines issued on that. Salary and benefits, a conversion charter, remember that's an existing school that a school district chooses to convert to a charter. They would have to follow at least the state minimum salary matrix, and everyone would participate in teacher retirement system and PEO. Startup charters, however, do not have to follow any set salary schedule, and they do not have to participate in retirement system or PEO. So that gives them more flexibility to meet their chosen mission.
And I would add to that also that even though there will be individuals who are not certified teachers, they will have the right to participate in the teacher retirement system. So that's a question that's been thrown out there. How can you have those who are not certified teachers actually participating in the teacher retirement system? But this flexibility does allow that to happen.
Public charter schools are, make sure I get that, they are subject to all applicable federal laws, including Disability Act and all of those, and all of the IDEA, special education, all of that. Except as provided in this act, public charter schools are not subject to state's education statutes and any state or local rule, regulation, policy, or procedure. And that's a broad swath of flexibility that they're granted. It even goes farther. It says, except as provided in this act, public charter schools are exempt regardless of any rule, regulation, policy, or procedure that has been established by the local school board, the State Board of Education, and the State Department of Education. So still a lot of swing available in this in that definition. So what is a public charter school authorizer? And that's what we're asking or contemplating tonight. An entity authorized under this act to review applications, approve or reject applications, enter into charter contracts with applicants, oversee public charter schools, and decide whether to review, not renew, or revoke charter contracts. And there are two eligible entities for that office: the local Board of Education or the Alabama Public Charter School Commission, the APCSC. It's important to know, if the local Board of Education is not an authorizer, then startup charter schools can apply directly to the APCSC for permission to create a charter school within that board's geographical boundaries. That is limited to 10 per year statewide. These are the members of the commission that was just recently appointed. They will have their first meeting, Dr. Murphy, August 27th.
August 27th. And I would point out that Sally Howell, who represents the Alabama Association of School Boards, does serve on the Public Charter School Commission.
Thomas Raines attended our educational leadership retreat this summer with principals, met with principals. Of course, many people remember Ed Richardson, former state superintendent. There's lots of people on there that we would know. What are the benefits of being an authorizer? Essentially, decisions regarding the approval of public charter schools will originate and have their first deliberations at the local level. So it allows the local education agency to engage first with the charter applicants rather than them going straight to the state commission. However, if the local Board of Education does deny, the applicants can appeal to the APCSC. Local oversight is balanced against the autonomy of the Public Charter Schools Governing Board. As you see, they have a lot of flexibility under this law, and the local board has the opportunity to oversee that and ensure compliance. When an application is denied and the applicant appeals to the APCSC, the local board has an 11th seat on the commission when that appeal is heard, so that they can speak directly to the commission to discuss and explain their reasons for denying the application. What are the obligations and responsibilities of being an authorizer? Authorizers are required to solicit, encourage, and guide the development of quality charter school applications. This is a very active posture, one which is, it's not simply a matter of standing at the gate and checking credentials. It is standing on the roadside with a sign saying, "Come here. Charter schools apply here." And so it is very much an active process.
I think I would add this also. I think there's been this thought that it was a wait and see if there might be those who would want to start up charter schools. But the law is very clear that we should be soliciting those individuals for charter schools and encouraging them and providing guidance in the development of those quality schools. So you become an extreme advocate at that point for charter schools should you become an authorizer. That's a commitment we'd have to make.
Those applications would have to be evaluated based on the National Association of Charter School Authorizers Principles and Standards. A copy of that book is provided in your folder for your review. The 3 core principles of a quality charter school authorizer kind of guide that process, and then there are specific standards that apply for all of the areas related to an application for a charter school. And authorizer would have to be very, very familiar with those principles and standards. Approve quality charter applications that meet the identified educational needs and promote a diversity of high-quality educational choices, and deny to approve weak or inadequate charter applications. Negotiate and execute those charter contracts with approved public charter schools. Monitor, in accordance with the charter contract terms, the academic, organizational capacity and infrastructure and physical performance and compliance of public charter schools. So the authorizer is in a position of oversight with regard to the charter and is responsible for ensuring that the charter school is following generally accepted accounting practices, that they are not breaking whatever laws that they're not exempt from, that they're staying in compliance with all of those.
That would include us monitoring and having oversight of building codes and anything that might relate to buildings, physical, everything that we oversee as it would relate to our work here as the district, we would have oversight for the charter school.
It makes the local education agency very similar to the State Department in terms of how they function to us. They would be the compliance checker, we would be the compliance checker for charter schools.
But I would have to say, because it's under contract, it's not just simply oversight, it's accountability.
Yes.
And legal responsibility for such things as physical performance. I mean, you know, it's pretty, you're doubling down on your basic responsibilities from a legal perspective.
Absolutely. And then, of course, at the end of the contract period, which will be 5 years initially, determine whether the charter contract merits renewal, non-renewal, or revocation. Yes, sir.
And looking at that, based off on what Mr. Cooper talked about, that will require more staffing if we go that route.
We do anticipate.
Yeah, so there's more cost to the public school for charter schools to be implemented in your district.
I think when you look at this and realize the obligations and responsibilities that we would have for oversight, there would absolutely be some need for resources, personnel to help support this. And I think there would also be financial resources that we just simply couldn't recover, even though later, probably a slide or two, you'll show that we could get up to 3%, I believe, of our local revenue brought back to us as the overseer. And by the way, I'm using that term because it's in the law. But there are implications for us in terms of personnel and cost.
Certainly. This statement, if you look at in your packet, the actual registration packet is there. If you want to look at this on page 3, this is a very, very important statement on page 3 of the state registration packet. It says, an authorizer may become liable for the debts or obligations of the public charter school or for claims arising from the performance of acts, errors, or omissions by the charter school if the authorizer has not complied with all oversight responsibilities required by law, including but not limited to those required by the Act. The terms all and but not limited to are the source of heartburn / opportunity, depending on which side of the legal question you're on there.
So we're the umbrella policy for the charter school.
Yes, sir.
What document, what is that?
The registration packet,
Yes, the one from the State Department, and then if you'll come to page 3, it's the very last paragraph.
athletics and transportation services, public charter schools will apply as separate members to AHSAA. So if they wanted to compete in those sports, they would do so as their own members of the High School Athletic Association. Local boards can enter into mutually agreeable contracts for transportation with public charter schools, but this is not a requirement of the law. The same would be true for other potential collaborations, including child nutrition, business services, special education services, etc.
I think there is an unknown here as it relates to the athletic piece, and that is, would there be an impact from the Tim Tebow as it relates to the athletics and the charter school authorization, or the charter school bill and its impact on us?
It is my understanding that a student that participates or goes to a charter school will not be allowed to participate in athletics at another school.
Is that based upon following the Tebow bill?
No, has nothing to do with.
It's not tied together?
But should that, as that Tim Tebow piece is entertained by the Alabama High School Athletic Association, or if it gets reintroduced to the legislators?
I think it's written in the law. I need to double check, but I think it says that if a student is attending a public charter school and that school does not offer athletics, then that student cannot participate in athletics at another school.
It is written into the Alabama School Choice, to this act. Whether it would end up, whether a contradicting law or a more inclusive law came later, that would be up to the legislature.
It might not be as obvious as I thought on the Tebow thing, because a charter school, you're actually extending, assuming you don't fill the school with local kids, you're extending beyond the geographic boundary of the school district. So that may be the start.
It'd be a big issue. You could recruit out of Mobile.
You really
Just
could.
said anywhere in the state.
If the seats are there, you could. What must be done to apply as an authorizer? The registration packet that I pointed out to you before is a very thin-looking, innocent document, but once completed, it would be a monster. First 2 points are pretty clear: notice of intent to serve as an authorizer, and then a statement of assurance. But then the other pieces, we'll look at those a little bit more detailed. First of all, a statement of capacity and commitment. This is as capacity and commitment as defined by the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. And explain the board's capacity and commitment to execute the duties of quality charter authorizing as defined by nationally recognized authorizing standards. Why the board wishes to serve as an authorizer. How the board proposes to use existing or additional staff, facilities, or resources to implement its vision and fulfill its duties. Potential policies and practices to streamline and systemize the board's work. The strategic vision for charter, including but not limited to a clear mission for serving any student, student group, student need, or community need that the board desires to serve using charter schools. The desired outcomes, priorities, goals, and timeframes for any student, student group, or student need, or community need. And the impact of the vision on the board's overall strategic plan for the district. Applicant solicitation plan. Explain the board's plans to solicit applicants, including but not limited to the following: plans to publicize its request for proposals to the public and all interested applicants. Procedures, timelines, and method of evaluation the board intends to utilize during the request for proposal process. Public forums or resources that will be available for interested applicants to receive additional information as needed. A performance framework. Describe or outline the performance framework the board will use to guide the establishment of a charter contract and for ongoing oversight and evaluation of public charter schools consistent with the requirements of the Act. And that can be academic and operational performance indicators, measures, and metrics that will guide that ongoing evaluation and monitoring aspect. It must include, at a minimum, student academic proficiency, student academic growth, achievement gaps in both proficiency and growth, attendance, recurrent enrollment, post-secondary readiness for high schools, financial performance and sustainability, and the governing board performance and stewardship.
So Dr. Dodson, this essentially means we would be running parallel school systems.
For those, yes, yes. Renewal, non-renewal, and revocation. Provide a draft of the board's renewal, revocation, and non-renewal processes consistent with the Act. Renewal is considered every 5 years in terms of expectations stated in the charter contract. The authorizer must provide a performance report to the charter 1 year before renewal, pointing out any areas of deficiencies where they would like, or they need to see improvement in order to renew. And the charter contracts can be revoked for a list of specific conditions listed in the Act. Typically, those are things such as submitting fraudulent reports, mismanagement of funds, those kinds of things. What would the financial impact be to Hoover City Schools? There's lots of caveats here because we are working, again, with a lot of unknowns and variables, and we've done these calculations very quickly. But what we've been able to decipher from the law, state funds, students receive the same per student allocation as any other student in that district's attendance zone would receive. State allocations differ by school district because the local matching share in the foundation program is different. So depending on where the student lives, what school zone they're coming from, that would determine the amount of the state allocation they would receive. The local school board, for whatever district that student comes from, would then be required to transfer the same per student allocation that they use, excluding funds earmarked or pledged through a board vote for debt service, capital expenditures, or transportation. So if you have funds that have been, through board action, you have pledged or reserved for those functions, those would not have to be, the taxes that go there would not have to be included in the local tax allocation. There's also a difference here between the startup charters and the conversion charters. There's a statement regarding the startup charters that says a maximum local tax allocation shall, for each student, not exceed the per student portion of the state required 10 mil match. That's pretty significant. That basically ensures that the same amount would be available in the end for any student around the state for a startup charter. The conversion charter, of course, you would be expected to expend the same, a higher proportion of local tax allocation, but those funds earmarked or pledged for debt service, capital improvement, and transportation would still be excluded from that formula. The best we can figure, this is what it would look like for us today, looking at the figures that we can just throw together. For every Hoover student who enrolls in a public charter school, the state allocation would be around $4,900. The startup charter school would get $1,350. The conversion charter school would get $2,370 because of that additional level. Authorizers can charge 3% of the state allocation to recover costs related to oversight. That percentage is lower if you have more charter schools. So 3% works for 1, 2, 3 charter schools in your district. So as long as we didn't have more than 3, you could charge 3%, but that would only amount, that's 3% of the $4,900, so that's only about $150 per student. Just for comparison, 200 students, that would be around $30,000 that you would have to cover all of your oversight responsibilities and burden that would go along with here. The Office of the General Counsel with the Alabama State Department of Education issued this advice to the state superintendents. They believe it will require extensive board resources to complete the authorizer registration process, prepare the RFP, evaluate applicants, and negotiate charter school contracts. It will require dedicated personnel in order to fulfill oversight responsibilities as an authorizer, and the amount paid to a local school board, speaking to that 3%, may not be sufficient to cover the cost of oversight of public charter schools. So, to be an authorizer or not to be an authorizer, that's the question.
Board members, let's take our place back to the front. We'll get some lights on and we'll hear questions and discussion.
It's rather obvious you don't want to be an authorizer.
Board members, we have spent a significant amount of time really looking at this law, and reading and rereading and discussing in some of our staff meetings. I have reached out to Donald Sweeney, who's our school board attorney. We've had some conversations about this. Have had conversations with Eric Mackey, who's the SSA executive director, and getting some of his thoughts. I know that Jane Williams, who's the legal counsel for school board, has been having a great deal of conversation with a lot of superintendents. One of the concerns that I have at this point is that the State Department of Education has established the Office of Public Charter Schools. Dr. Chris Wilson is the head of that, and we've had Dr. Wilson on the phone. Chris and I have talked. We've actually phone conferenced her into some of our staff meetings. And the preliminary guidelines for the public charter school will not be available to us until sometimes in October. And even at that point, it's going to be preliminary guidelines. The commission, the 10 individuals that we saw up here, Sally Howell being one of those, that commission meets for the first time on August the 27th. However, the commitment that needs to be made by us as a board is September 1. So 3 days prior to us needing to make the commitment is the very first meeting for the commission. Would not think that we would get much substance out of that meeting. I think it'll be more of just of them getting themselves organized. And so basically the position that we're in is to make a decision about being an authorizer without having some critical information available to us, such as what are the preliminary guidelines that will come out of the Office of Public Charter Schools from the State Department. So I share those 2 dates, the August 27th Commission Day, the October, some point in October, the preliminary guidelines will come from the State Department. It would have been at least in my thinking, in better order if we had been able to have had those preliminary guidelines first, had the commission have opportunity to meet and perhaps give some thought to some procedures, but the timeline does not work out that way. So I'll just share that, and then certainly if you have questions and conversations and discussions, that's the purpose of tonight's meeting.
A couple of points. It's interesting if you look back through this, from comments by Del Marsh and Tommy Bice and people who've been close to watching this unfold, Del Marsh being the sponsor of the bill. The intention for charter schools is really serve the unmet needs of certain students. And to me, I don't, based upon the conversation with Tommy Bison, the way they put it out there, it doesn't seem to have that much application relative to us. And then I see all of this and the associated cost, liability, and everything. And finally, the third part of it is, at the end of the day, we're the 11th seat on the Charter School Commission. So no matter what's recommended or to have a charter school or not, somebody, Kathy, you will be down there saying yay or nay based upon how it impacts our district and what we are seeing and how we feel about this with some factual information. So as a charter school authorizer, the end result to me is the same, because in a 10-person commission, you got 7 educators, you got Sally Howell, you got a guy who's, now a minister. I mean, you've got kind of a pretty solid group of people, in my opinion, where you know what's going on. So I don't see incurring the liability and cost and everything until we know more. It's my feeling.
In the law, there's actually an outline as to why we might want to establish a public charter school. And when I read through that, we're doing many of these, if not all of these things. For example, the first thing is that we're doing, that we're providing high-quality public schools. Well, we're already doing that. And so as I sort of walked through that we're focused on strengthening the academic performance of elementary, secondary public schools, we're doing that. that we're trying to customize programs to fit the needs of individual students. We're working very diligently on that. So if you walk through the intent and the purpose of why we have charter schools, I've said this to you all before, I hope that we're doing such an outstanding job in our school districts that charter schools aren't necessary. Or if we believe that there's something more that we should be doing, that we get busy doing it. That we're not necessarily having to say to other entities out there, you know, what are your ideas and come do this work for us, but if we know there's something we should do to get busy to support our children, that we do that. So that's certainly a thought.
Does charter schools, and I agree with Mr. Hoover, but does charter schools are only directed to particular schools or lower performing schools, or it can be a multi-facet of schools? So say, for instance, I'm going to come in with a technology school.
Yes.
I mean, so if that's the case, it's not really geared toward a certain dynamic of a student base. It's geared toward whatever entity wants to come in and market a brand.
But we would actually create the RFP. Do we feel like there's an area of weakness in our school district where we may not be supporting our children as well as we
Right.
want to? And then what we would do in our RFP then would be to reach out to see if there's someone that would want to engage in that area. So if we felt like we were doing a really great job with science, math, technology, engineering, STEM, then that may not be something that would be in our RFP, and therefore that would not be an area where a charter school could come to the table and say, hey, you know, ours is about STEM. If that's not in our RFP as an area that we want to focus on with a charter school, they couldn't put that on the table for us, or we would simply, I would assume at that point, choose to deny.
Well, even with saying that, going back to the 10-member commission, including our denial person that may go up, you know, it can be overturned.
That's exactly right.
So, regardless of what's in the RFP, we really don't know the guidelines on that. Well, we don't have the guidelines, first of all.
We don't. Now, it's my understanding that the commission, Alabama Public School Commission, this 10-member team, would give some deference to us. And, you know, gives you that 11th seat at the table to talk about why you denied or reject. But you then only have that one vote, so you could be easily overturned if, you know, if the commission chose to do that.
And I do agree with you. If it's something that we're not doing, give us an opportunity to actually solve that problem and get busy doing it. But we have no type of, I mean, again, we got to wait till August 27th to, for the state to convene, and since in October, 2 guidelines to come out, and we have a September 1 date to decide on something. To me, it's like me purchasing a piece of land with a house on it and never seen it, and then when I finally go out of town to see it, it's swampland.
Definitely questions on the table.
Okay. You know, we saw, when you read through the presentation, go through the presentation line presented so well, you know, you always look for the landmines. You always look for the things that are problematic. From your perspective, one of the reasons we would want to get a charter school authorizer, I don't fear charter schools one way or the other. Why do we want to take on that role as an authorizer when at the end of the day, we make our case before the commission when the charter comes up for approval or not?
And certainly, as I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who are superintendents, you know, the conversations on the other side of that has sounded like this. Why wouldn't we want to be at the table?
Right.
You know, why wouldn't we want to you know, have the first shot at approving or saying, no, this doesn't fit who we are? The complexity, I think, is, yes, you want to be at the table, but you would like to have full disclosure before you pull up to the table.
Right.
So we're kind of, you know, should we choose to be authorizers, we're pulling up to the table, not yet really knowing what the rules of the game are going to be, because those preliminary guidelines are not developed for us yet. We know what the law says. We also know this is subject to a lot of interpretation, because as we pass this around over the last several weeks, no, I read that to mean this. Well, no, I read that to mean this. I think I really believe there'll have to be some case law that defines this, many parts of this for us before we're sure what that really does mean.
But you know enough now about potential liabilities and the potential costs to being authorized. The question becomes, can you afford to pull it to the table? I mean, you might want to be at the table, that's a noble thing. I mean, at what cost? And then that's where
Yes.
I'm not sure how we just are doing this, we're just jumping out there.
Yeah.
I guess my first question here is, do we have an attorney that's present here this evening? Our attorney?
Mr. Sweeney is not with us this evening.
Okay, is there someone from, his firm that should be here? Because it seems like I'm a lawyer, but I'm not in past.
Yes.
Well, why are you asking?
Well, the question is because we're talking about a lot of legal ramifications here, and that's what was just talked about right before that. And so, I have questions that I would like to hear from a lawyer that specializes in education. Mr. Gifford is the purpose of that question. When this was addressed, and I heard the charter schools when they began years ago to talk in Montgomery, understanding that public schools in different counties are not the same level as Hoover public schools. Am I right with that, Dr. Murphy? I know that you're coming from a smaller county at one time. Is that the understanding to help address some?
Yes, if you read through the law, one of the things that you'll clearly see is that there is, we should give some preference to any charter that would be to support at-risk students. So it actually says that here, but there's no limitation to that. So maybe in some of your higher poverty community areas where you can't offer the kinds of programs and opportunities and resources that Hoover, for example, can, that might make some of those areas more attractive. I don't
And
No.
do you know, as a superintendent, are there any other boards of education as of today that are trying to be authorizers?
To date, no other school district has filed with the Office of Public Charter Schools to be an authorizer. Now, certainly I'm out there reading the papers
Right.
just like you guys are.
Okay. And I have not seen,
And-
I looked yesterday evening.
Yeah, I can tell you just a few of those articles that I've read in the last day or two today. Superintendent Ledbetter, Dothan Schools, they are taking a pass on this. They are not gonna be a public school authorizer. Athens Schools, I believe, are giving thought to, they've not filed their paperwork. I believe Decatur's giving some thought to this. They've not filed their paperwork. Madison City Superintendent D. Fowler is giving some thought to passing a resolution that says, hey, we want to be an authorizer, but not perhaps completely developing this whole process because of the unknowns, but wanting to nevertheless be positioned to be an authorizer. So you've got sort of a mixed bag, but to this day, none of those individuals have actually filed their RFP. Now, that doesn't mean anything because you have a couple of weeks before September 1, and these people may be in earnest out there writing and preparing to submit those. I've had conversations with most of those superintendents. The thought is that none of them may be attempting to be authorizers for this current school year 15-16, but are looking to perhaps be authorizers for the school year 16-17.
And that will lead me to my next question. If we choose not a non-recommendation, we don't do it this year, then next year is this something that we can
Yes.
look at again?
Yes, so if you take a pass this year, should we choose to take a pass this year, nothing says that we've forever taken a pass on never being able to be an authorizer. Perhaps you take a pass this year and try to understand the guidelines a little bit better. And once we understand those, then yeah, we want to sign up for that ball game because we know the rules now.
Right.
So just because we do not make this decision or choose to do so by September 1, that's only taking a pass on the 15-16 current school year. Now, some people have said, well, how could they even start a charter school because we've already started school? Well, a charter school could start January and run January to October school year and take the fall off as their break. So because of the amount of flexibility, which by the way, as Tommy Bice says, none of us have to start school every year in August and then every year in May. We all have flexibility. That's another thing that I would point out to you. Under the Alabama Accountability Act, we started out as a flexibility bill, by the way, and morphed into something very differently, but at least in that Alabama Accountability Act, there is the allowance for us to have some flexibility. So if we want to have some flexibility to do things differently, our state superintendent, Tommy Bice, has said, hey, get out of the box and go for it. You know, ask permission, do what's right for children.
Right.
So we do have some flexibility. Now this bill allows huge flexibility for charter schools. And some of the conversation I've heard this week is there's a lot of flexibility for the charter school, and the more flexibility that's exercised out there for them, the more liability the authorizer assumes. So you have a lot of flexibility, charter school, but the authorizer side of that is you've also incrementally increased your liability for that.
And if we pass as being an authorizer, let's say in the next 5 years, if someone wants to be a charter school, they would apply directly to the commission at that point, like in our Hoover city.
That's right. If we were not an authorizer, they would automatically decline at this level. It would be taken to the state level, to the commission level.
And then the public discussion at that time will occur where the commission meets and not necessarily bringing us to the table.
Yes, it's my understanding that if it goes to the state commission, that the state commission has an obligation to bring back to the community a meeting that says, is this a charter piece that is beneficial for your school district? So I think even if it goes to the commission level, at the state level, that commission wants to know, does that fit Hoover City Schools, and would have some sort of community forum or interaction to determine if indeed they thought that was beneficial to our school district.
And I'm a big pros and cons kind of person when I do a list, and right now, looking at this and limited information that we have and the unknowns on 8/27, I believe in October, what is the benefit to the Hoover City Schools for us to be an authorizer today, or by September 1st? If you know, if there are any.
Sure, sure.
I not know.
I think the thing that we've said is that no one wants to miss out in being a part of the conversation and a part of sharing what we think we need as a school district that might support and give individualized support and instruction for our children. I don't think any of us want to be missing from that table. So I guess if I were to say what is the big piece to that, it would be not having someone possibly make decisions for our children and our community where we took that path that I've referred to. The most significant concern that I have as your superintendent is the liability that is not all clearly defined for us at this point, and the fact that it feels a little bit premature for us to have to make a decision about jumping when we're not sure what's underneath us because we don't know what the guidelines are at this point.
Any additional questions from the board? Any questions from the public?
Okay, so if we take a pass and don't become an authorized user and somebody goes above us and asks permission, what liability does our school district have?
If we're not an authorizer, we do not have liability at that point. The commission takes on the authorization and the liability side.
That's a good question, I had the same one.
Yeah.
We share the liability if they in fact authorize over us. Good question.
Mr. Singer?
Is there any penalty by not making a decision by September 1st?
No, sir, there's no penalty other than you clearly are not an authorizer if you miss the date, unless for some reason that should be extended, and I don't anticipate that to be an extended date. I think it's hard and fast September 1 in order to be an authorizer for 15-16. Now, here's a question that I do not yet have resolved, and so I throw it out, and perhaps you all know the answer to this. Should we choose to become an authorizer? And once we understand the guidelines a little bit better, these preliminary guidelines come in to be hard, fast rules, these are the guidelines, and that doesn't work for whatever reason for us. That's not the game we wanted to be a part of, and we didn't understand it to look that way and to be that way. If we go out and say we want to be an authorizer, don't know the guidelines yet, what right do we have to come back later once we understand the guidelines and go, time out? That's not what we thought or expected or believed the rules or guidelines to be, and we really don't want to be a party to that. Once we put ourselves out there as an authorizer, I've not been able to find anything in my reading and research that says, how do we unauthorize ourselves then? For lack of a better thought about that.
I would think that, number one, you could unauthorize yourself next year at August 31. And in the meantime, if you were presented with something, you could decline, and at that point, it would go back to the state.
And my only thought about that was if when we authorize someone, should we authorize someone, that's a 5-year commitment out there for them. And I think in terms of the spirit of what is expected of us, the spirit is, you said you want to be an authorizer, and now you're a year into it, and you don't want to be the authorizer for that group now, that charter now, the impact on that group at that point, which again is why I really, really wished we understood the rules and the guidelines so that we can say, hey, we get this, and we're all in, and we want to be a part of this. In the absence of having all those answers, you know, there are some concerns, but you may very well be right, Mr. Presley. We say we want to be an authorizer, and we start to discover a little bit more about this, and that doesn't work for us, and we're able to go back to the commission and say, we don't want to do this. We're going to relinquish that to you.
But likewise, it's interesting to me, I just now thought of this. If I thought I wanted to start a charter school, I would come to you and say, I want to start a charter school. Here's in essence what I'm thinking. I need your help to tell me what size the classroom should be, what kind of furniture I need, what kind of accessibility. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So you do all this preliminary work, and they go, golly, you know, there's no way I can put together the money to do this. It's just not going to work for whatever reason. But thanks for your help. And the resources that have been expended on the front end for just a look-see is significant.
Well, I think Ron Dotson said it this morning or today when we were talking about this. We take this from birth to death. So from the very beginning of this, we're involved. But even on the end of this, Mr. Cooper, let's say that for whatever reason things didn't go well for that charter school, and they were brought to closure. Either they chose to do that or we chose to do that because they weren't meeting the expectations. Then we have an obligation as the authorizer to then make sure all their personnel was paid, all of their bills were covered, and any leftover money goes to the Education Trust Fund. None of that comes to us for the services that we would render to bring appropriate closure to that. So the law reads that from beginning to end, as an authorizer, we have duties and responsibilities to that. So not only do you have the obligation to the charter school itself from beginning to end, you still have all of the reports that you have to provide to the state, the attendance, the academics. So you have a role to play with the charter school, but you're also still ensuring the side of data going to the state, all of that data that has to go to them. At the same time, you're running the school district for the children who are not in the charter.
But I would say you have shared responsibility for academic achievement. Is that? Because if the charter school is not achieving things.
Our children aren't achieving.
Well, yes, but I mean, you're on the contract to make sure should she? Regardless of your kids or the charter school. I mean,
Hoover City Schools.
Melanie said it best, you run two school systems.
There's one question, I saw Emily Schultz come in, I hate to put her on the spot, but, that, last question regarding, authorizer, become authorizer, you want to unauthorize. Emily, do you have any idea or on that, or probably should probably?
Can we turn the lights back on? I can
Yes.
see Emily back there.
The intent was that the authorizer registration process was an annual process. So September 1st of every year, there would be an opportunity to unenroll or enroll as an authorizer.
And Emily, can you state your title and?
Sure. I work for the Alabama Coalition for Public Charter Schools, so I provided policy support to the legislature as they were drafting the legislation.
And let me say this to you, Emily, thank you so much, because you've reached out to me on several occasions, and you've provided some documents for our review, so thank you for supporting us as we're having this conversation.
So I just appreciate y'all being so thoughtful about it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I have another question. So how many groups or organizations do we have asking to create a charter school in our school district?
To date, none, but remember, there's a piece that really has to precede this, and that is this school district has to decide what it wants its RFP, request for proposals, to be. So again, I'm just gonna pick on STEM. And this isn't true of Hoover City Schools, so I'll use it to pick on. Let's say that we weren't comfortable that we were doing a good job with science, math, and technology, engineering. And so that was in our RFP, that we wanted to give preference to those that would help us focus on math, science, engineering, technology. Really, our RFP has to be developed first prior to any individuals who want to start a charter school, to see if their startup matches what we're looking for in our school district. It's not just one of those where somebody says, hey, I have a great idea and I want to start a charter school, and it's about X, Y, and Z, and that X, Y, and Z doesn't fit our proposed needs. Did I answer that for you?
You did, and I guess that kind of leads me to this point, because you said, that there are some things in our own school district that we would be paying attention and working on. So talking about the time and the resources that we would use possibly in building the RFP, would we not use those to improve upon our schools that really are doing well but just need a little bit of attention in some other areas? Wouldn't our resources better be served focusing on those areas?
Our resources, my opinion as your superintendent, our resources will best be spent with us focusing on the children we have and making this the very best school district we can make it. And when we see that there are gaps, or we see that there are needs or areas to focus, that we funnel our resources, including people and monies, behind that, versus assuming that others might be able to come and do it better than us. That's an opinion.
Okay.
Board members, if I might have this privilege, if I might, there is a few additional conversations that are on my schedule for me to have with some other superintendents. I believe there will be a Friday morning meeting where I and some other superintendents get together, maybe some of our superintendents in this area, and talk about charter schools, what we still have questions about, and what we can answer questions for each other. I would hope that we might be able to perhaps have some conversation further with Sally Howell, or Eric Mackey, or Tommy Bice, or some of the other critical players in our organization, Earl Frank with class. We're going to see if, when we get our superintendents together, if we might be able to have some additional conversations maybe with some of those folks. And what I would prefer to do this evening is to allow you to sort of absorb what we've said tonight. There may be questions that you still have. We'll certainly try to seek answers for those. A few questions that still linger in my mind, which I would feel much more comfortable to hit pause and get answers to, rather than rushing forward with some unanswered concerns. I know that no one likes special call board meetings. But I really would like to ask you to allow me to attend another meeting or two and sit at the table with another one or two people that I think can help me frame this a little bit better and answer some of my questions, rather than asking for your approval or disapproval as an authorizer this evening.
I agree totally.
Thank you.
Concur.
I agree.
Motion to table consideration of charter school authorized.
We have a motion to table. Do we have a second? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Motion has been carried.
But thank you, and Ron, and everybody who participated in putting it together. It's very important, very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is our personnel report. Any questions from the board?
Well, Bill, you notice we've got some changes in bus drivers. How are we doing with performing of our personnel?
We have 6 vacancies remaining. I believe Dr. Murphy
Yes.
gave a list.
Did I share with you the transportation department status report?
They haven't earned that time.
Okay, I'm sorry. So it's in your stack, I apologize, it's there. We gave you an update on our transportation department. Mary has also provided us an update on any vacancies that we still have in the district outside of transportation is in your packet. And then, of course, tonight's request for you to approve some other employments and other courses of action on the personnel report.
And there are approximately 10 drivers that are in training. They have to go through the certification process. So we do have some that are in that process.
Good.
Can I say, I'm not trying to be hard about this question, but you were kind enough in July to give us an update on enrollment. And this is the current update. This is not total ADM that's going to be reported necessarily, so it's pretty accurate, I guess.
Yes.
I can't remember the number from July. You got 13,649 today. 13,500 or something.
13,545.
13,649 enrollment as of today's date in our school district.
And as of last year, I guess what I'm asking is
Comparison.
how many new students will be taken on this year? Roughly. Plus or minus for each of them.
Is that, well, we will not know that number until past, how many days past September 1st? How does that?
20 days.
20 days past Labor Day, so that's when,
But in terms of a comparison this time last
Well,
year
no,
to
no,
this,
we ended school with some number, 13,428 as an example. We got 30.
okay.
I mean, I'm trying to see the net increase we acquired on this run.
Yeah, gotcha.
Well, the difference with that is too, we've had some leave, so the increase can't be calculated until we know who replaced those that left. Does that make sense? So we may
I
have,
get all that. All I'm saying is, last day of school, we had X number of kids.
so what's our,
Well, this report right here, we got X number of kids. What's the difference between the two? The reason I'm asking the question is because, 150, so that's a little bit less. Last year was flat. This year is some incremental growth. It appears to be short, less than it has been in the past. I'm asking the question, I guess, that leads up to new teacher positions versus incremental students. How many new teacher positions do we have this year? Net.
Teaching position, Ron, when we were looking at the net teacher units, were we around 19? Does that sound right, Kathy and Ron? About 19? A majority of those, we had removed foreign language units the year prior and found out we needed to add some of those units back. And then there were several that were in the instructional support area based on student needs.
So roughly 150 kids and 15 or 19, whatever teacher units. The reason I'm asking the question, is we've got how many units that are locally funded? 172?
I thought it was around 160, 170.
It's all budget stuff. It's kind of, and I know you're on top of that, Will, Pete, but it's helpful to tie
yeah,
all that together.
so I would make this observation, and your point is well made, and that is, going forward, we will need to drive increased units based on student enrollment. not just solely, but in great measure, because there are opportunities we want to offer our students that's above and beyond opportunities that we might be able to offer. But we will be looking very closely and very carefully, because everything above the earned teacher units that we carry in the school district are then carried out of either some federal support, but for the most part comes from local revenue. And that's something that we're gonna have to be very careful and very thoughtful about going forward. And if we could, we'll get those numbers and we'll shoot an email out and share that.
Well, it's not critical, it's just, I'm just trying to use those numbers. Like,
We
Yes.
earned this year 782.86 units. So that would leave us with approximately, backing out federal units, and all, about 150 locally funded units, approximately, teacher units. You know, and I'm just doing top of my head numbers. The 782.86 is a good number though. Approximate numbers, because I would have to go in and pull out the federally funded pieces of that.
I think, Mr. Cooper, in regards to the enrollment and teacher units, something that we've done, especially in recent years, is monitored the summer enrollment very closely. And for example, this year, we looked at some schools that had decreased enrollment. So we transferred units to a school that had increased enrollment. You know, maybe in years past that once they reached a cap, we automatically added, but we did a lot of analyzing before that was done.
I understand, I mean, but, you know, as you start, you peel back the onion as far as you want, but for example, if you take Deer Valley, it's near capacity, you can't add more teachers, there's no physical space, so then you get into classroom sizes. So, you know, it's all tied together, and it's all something that's a very important budget thing that I know Dr. Murphy's working on. Okay, cool.
All right, any additional questions? Personnel report. If there are none, do I have a motion to approve the personnel report?
So moved.
Second?
Sorry.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We have to talk about these, just a couple of dates here that we stated we would talk about at last board meeting. First one, we will need to schedule a budget hearing date. The next one coming up.
Kathy, we already have some proposed dates, do we?
You had proposed the 11th, but that's the Thursday before the 14th. One is the 14th, which is the next scheduled monthly board meeting. Am my dates wrong, Louise? It's the 14th. Yeah, and so I think it was the 11th, which should be that Thursday.
10th.
10th.
The
The
10th is the
Thursday
Thursday, so the proposal was September 10 on Thursday and in front of our board meeting on the 14th.
And we can tie this in here too, since that's close up, and see if we can have it on the same date if possible. The time will restrict that. We did talk about whole board training as well too. There's probably another date, because that's 2 hours. We have to have the whole board training, unless we can tie both of those in together. But what's your idea, Ms. Cooper? I know. No?
No, it's the area, I mean, no coverage.
What now?
Nothing.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. But we did talk. So would we consider a whole board training on that same date? Can we discuss that with ASB? I would hate to have 2 hours and 2 hours. That's too long. 4 and 4. Matter of fact, you know, we have a certain time limit here now, but how can that be tied in together so we can attack both things?
To have our last budget hearing connected to our work session, our 2-hour work session on the 14th?
However you want to do it, the 10th or the 14th.
I don't,
Now following me?
yeah,
Okay, let me-
if you're, do we have to do the board training the same?
We don't have to.
The
We-
reason I'm saying is just because those are, work days.
Oh, well, that's fine. I mean, Louise, can we push it back to October? We was trying to make sure the ASB sent out a few dates here. It's coming up, so, I mean, we can push it out to October or whatnot. I mean, that's fine. So let's scratch that off the books, and then that way, we can come on another day as, on the next go around. So the September 10th fine for the first public, hearing.
And I believe we just have to have a quorum, is that correct?
Okay.
Because there'll be
I
no
will not
action
be able
taken
to.
at that hearing.
I think it's gonna be tough.
What time you wanna do it early?
As early, late as, I mean, 6 o'clock has been, too late? Okay. Yes, sir.
With that 10th meeting, will that be at one of the high schools?
Yes.
The 14th.
The 14th will be.
At the high.
Yeah, the 14th will
The
be.
10th would be here.
Yeah. So, 6 o'clock to 10th?
I cannot come, but I think that there's so many, as long as it's before fall.
Well, and I think the way that works out is too, that a lot of this is also for our public. They have two different opportunities to see the budgets. I mean, you make one and you're fine, I'm sure.
I can't make either.
Because you're gonna research anyway, so that's not a problem. So if we're fine with the 10th at 6 o'clock here at central office, that works out perfectly. And then, we'll wait for Dr. Murphy to determine where that location of the next 14th event will occur. So so we have our dates, okay? Let's try to make sure we have it at 6. I think those 6 o'clock times are a lot better, especially those public events. So we're talking about the 10th here, central office, and the 14th at Hoover High School, both at 6 o'clock. And that'll tackle both of our budget hearings.
And so we'll have the budget hearing as a part of the actual board meeting itself, or would that be in front of sort of like a work session, or how do we usually do that?
Typically, if it's not part of the gavel meeting, it's a work session that would precede the meeting. So the budget hearing would begin at 7, probably run for 45 minutes or an hour, depending on the discussion. And then immediately after the end of then the gavel would strike for the board meeting.
We're not at 7. You'd start the board meeting, you'd start their budget hearing at 5, and then go to the board meeting at 6?
Or either start the budget hearing at 6 and board
Yeah.
meeting there
Oh,
immediately
okay.
thereafter. Yeah,
You know-
it's whatever the desire is, it's not set in stone. It's usually not part of it's a hearing, so it's not really
Yeah.
part of the meeting.
And we can do it prior, and again, we can make sure that, you know, I'm not just a stickler, make sure we stay within a time limit, so we can get some quality information out and not just be sitting in our seats. So, 6 o'clock will be fine, and I don't anticipate it stretching up 2 hours even with that board meeting. So we'll try to stay on task. If we can, Dr. Murphy, let's try not to, unless you need to, put things on the agenda that may soak up that time. If they can wait until October,
Yeah, focus should be on the budget
yeah,
in September.
So we'll be okay with that. So we can have both at 6, and hopefully, the hour 15, hour 30-minute mark, we can stay consistent with that. We're currently at that now, so we don't have any more questions. I think we're good on the times and the actual dates and the actual locations. Next thing on the agenda, we have executive session, per code section 3625A-7. We were convened into executive session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second. All in favor say aye. All opposed? All right. That's been carried. We'll not give a time frame. I try to do that, but it never works out. We're going to be as quick as possible in this executive session, depending on when the board goes back in the back.
Can you give the reason why you're going into executive session?
Good name and character.